Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace. Joining us in the studio is the wonderful Cat Filipinos.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
Really good. We're going to be answering your questions. This is a new format for us. We're choosing a topic every single week, and then you guys can submit your questions on Facebook and on the YouTubes, which is probably where you're watching this, and then we're going to answer your questions in videos just like this. So we got a lot of really great questions on lighting last week, and right now I'm going to do my best job to answer those questions without looking like an idiot. That's my goal.
Okay, so first question from Eric Busert on Facebook. How do you get good exposure in terms of the histogram?
In terms of the histogram. So Eric, I never really used the histogram. In the beginning, when I started taking pictures, I just kind of took a picture and looked at the back of the camera. I think it's called chipping. And then I used a light meter for a long time. And then now I just look at the back of the camera again. So, but as far as your histogram goes, basically you want to keep in mind anything that's on the left side is going to be your darker pixels, and on the right side is going to be your lighter pixels. So a lot of people think whatever you're shooting needs to be about in the middle. Now you don't want a whole lot of information like all the way crammed to the left or all the way crammed to the right. But if you are taking a picture of something like that's very dark, like a picture outside at night, and most of the picture is going to be, supposed to be black, most of your information should be towards the black side. Don't worry about putting that in the middle. Vice versa, if you're taking a picture outside on a snowy day, most of your histogram should be on the right side. But you want to get a little bit of space there. You don't want all the way on the right, or else you're going to be blowing out some pixels there, and you don't want to spike all the way to the left. If you got your histogram here, come in just maybe 5% on each side, and that's about where you want your lightest and darkest information, and then everything in the middle is going to follow in pretty smoothly. Your histogram won't give you a great idea if you've overexposed your subject, because it still might be within the range of the histogram, but it will give you enough information to probably bring that back in post if it's not completely blown out either one way or the other.
Perfect. Well, I hope that answered your question, Eric. So next question is from Marcus Ebanks on Facebook. He's asking, if you have no access to professional lighting, what could be the self-made or cheaper alternatives we could possibly use to create similar lighting situations as professional lighting, whether it be shooting outdoors or an interior space? You guys are awesome.
Awesome, good question. So when I was first starting out, I basically would use just about anything. Light is light, and the only difference between a lamp in your house and a strobe is that the strobe's capable of putting out a lot more light than the lamp. But you can get things like at Lowe's or Home Depot, any supply store, like like work lights that they would put on like a job site, and those put out a lot of light. They're relatively inexpensive, and light is light. I've heard people like using a sheet. It's like a bed sheet, so you can put up like a work lamp and then put a bed sheet in front of your work lamp, and that's like a softbox that you already probably have a white bed sheet hanging around, and so $30 you got a softbox that you can kind of take with you. Another thing that I think I've seen a lot used many times is just the actual lighting of a scene. So like if you're shooting indoors, like see if you can use a lamp in a creative way and actually have the lamp light your subject. Cameras now are getting so great, you can really crank your ISO up, and if you are shooting with a $350 50mm 1.4, you can really let a lot of light in even when there's not a ton of light in a scene. So I mean, we even have a neon A behind us that is probably casting some light on me right now, and no strobe. So there are a lot of inexpensive ways to do it.
Okay, next is Tori F on YouTube. She's asking about tips on balancing natural and artificial light.
Okay, good question, Tori. The number one thing that I see people could improve on is usually they don't have enough fill light when they're trying to balance these things. Usually the artificial light, being a strobe or whatever, is way too bright in comparison to the natural light that you're using, especially if you're shooting like at dusk or even at night. So in those cases, I would say set your shutter speed just a little bit slower. You might introduce a little bit of motion blur, but it's better than having like a bright subject and then a completely dark background. If you're going to be doing this during the day, I recommend using reflectors and things like that. If you do have to use lighting, like a strobe or something like that, outdoors on a relatively sunny day, with that, in a tough lighting situation like that, you can use a light meter that'll tell you like your relative exposure between flash and your ambient, like the Seconic L758DR will actually tell you the difference between your strobe and the ambient. So if, for instance, you're looking for like a 50-50 balance, that light meter will tell you that on there. Other than that, kind of like looking at it by eye. But there are so many different situations. I would really recommend, if you get to where you're exposed well with your artificial light, your strobe or whatever, play around with your shutter speed. Make your shutter speed a little bit faster, make your shutter speed a little bit slower. Find a range where you get a pretty good balance. You don't want too big of a contrast, but you want just enough to be able to stand your subject out from the background. But if there's too big of a contrast, it won't look real. It'll look like you've actually lit it with a softbox. So I would say look for that sweet spot where the light's just pumping in just a little bit more light, enough to bring out the subject and maybe cancel out some shadows under the eyes and things like that. And pretty much it.
Next question is from T. Capin on YouTube. Any tips on using flash outdoors?
Using flash outdoors. Was it going to be speed lights or?
I don't know, he just said flash.
Using flash outdoors. All right, if you are going to be using like a strobe or whatever, I would say grab yourself a battery pack. We have Paul C. Buff lithium ion battery packs that, I don't know, maybe $250 or so, and they're great. You can also rent generators, like the Honda generators, the small ones. Relatively, they're like this big. To buy, they're $1,000. To rent, they're like $100 a day. They're relatively silent and they'll power lights for an entire shoot, and those are really great. Other tips for using lighting outdoors: you generally want to stay away from large umbrellas because the wind will catch those umbrellas and your light will hit the ground. So bring plenty of sandbags if you can. If you can kind of like use, instead of a light stand, if you can use a super clamp to like clamp your light to something, like a tree, the tree's not going to go anywhere and your light probably won't go anywhere either. And as far as getting your ratios and things like that, the tough part is during the day, you're not going to be able to shoot with a shutter speed faster than 1/200th of a second. So you might have to lower down your ISO in order to balance your strobe light with your ambient light. If you are using speed lights, which are the little like battery powered things, Canon and Nikon, you will be able to use a high speed sync. So you could shoot at like 1/500, 1/800th of a second, and that would help to like capture moment and also help darken out the sky while exposing for your subject. So I would recommend doing that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Good luck, because it's fun.
Tuan Nguyen from YouTube. He's asking, what is the best way to light a group of about 12 people in a normal sized living room with low ambient light?
Good question. Depending on whether you're using a speed light or a strobe, what I would always recommend doing is pointing the light at the back wall. So if you've got your subjects are over here and the camera's over here, I would recommend pointing light in the backwards, especially if the back wall is a white wall or a light colored wall. What that's going to do is it's going to pump the light backwards, and the light's going to hit the back wall and then reflect forwards, and it's going to serve as like a giant softbox that won't be too directional. Basically, at this point, what you want to do is fill in, shadows and things like that. You can also bounce light on the ceiling if there's a low ceiling, but in that case, you will get shadows, under people's eyes, and they'll be a little bit darker. So turn those lights backwards, and then use that wall for a giant light source. Usually, it's worked for me, so hopefully it'll work for you.
Awesome. Oh, and special shout out to Tuan, because I noticed that he was helping a lot of people answer their questions.
Aww.
Yeah. So thank you for helping out and asking or helping out with these questions too. So
makes my job easier.
This is from Omar Ehab on YouTube. He's asking, can you tell us about commercial and advertising light, for example, Dean Bradshaw, Tim Tatter, and Eric Almus, how to achieve this quality and what it depends on? Thanks a lot.
Good question. I would say one of the biggest things that I notice about these photographers' work, and I'm friends with all those guys, which pretty proud to say that. They're using large light sources, and they're using multiple light sources, and the same thing that we do here in the studio. When I first started out, I was using just speed lights, and I didn't even have any modifiers on them. Then I was like speed lights with a couple umbrellas, and then it's like, oh, I found bigger umbrellas and bigger soft boxes, and large parabolic reflectors, and the giant bronze colored things, and they get more expensive and things like that. But generally what I'm seeing is using larger high quality light sources Also, the balance is usually pretty good. It seems like these people are maybe spending the same amount of time you would on a photo shoot and just getting better results, but that's usually not the case. Usually they're spending more time, and I know that from my own experience. When I spend 20 minutes setting up lighting for a shoot, it's never as good as when I spend 2 or 3 hours. And sometimes you have to spend that time the day before, pre-lighting a shoot. So definitely getting your lighting ratios really nice and refined and nailed in is a really great way to get that refined look. And it takes a lot of time, and then using large light sources is my other tip. As well as balancing your fill light. Not enough fill light will usually make a picture look worse. So that's one of those things I would recommend. If you're shooting indoors, fire light into the ceiling at a high power. It'll just fill the entire room with a little bit of light, or into like a V flat behind you, or a giant softbox right behind the camera. You want a decent bit of fill light, or else your shadows are going to get a little bit too dark. But other than that, pretty much they're using the same types of lighting that we all are. So they're just playing around with it more.
All right, next question is from Michael P. on YouTube. He's asking, when lighting an element that is going to be included in a composite, are there any strategies you employ? Example, shooting with flatter light versus matching the lighting exactly. Thanks.
Good question. Compositing can be done in different ways. You can shoot your subject first, shoot your background first. Either way, I usually prefer to have photographed my background first. That way I know what lighting should be on my subject. So my general go-to is try to match the lighting on your subject to the lighting in the background. For instance, if there's a street light in the background right here, see if you can place a light in a similar place on the background. We actually have a great behind the scenes video where we put a giant girl in a small room talking about matching the lighting from an environment to there. So we'll put a link somewhere in this video. Just click on it and it's the magical, it's YouTube. You could just go to it. But I would always recommend photographing your background first. That way you know what kind of lighting you have, and then you can simulate that lighting for your subject. That being said, if your background is just completely natural light, if you can, shoot it outside. Shoot it natural light, try to shoot it at about the same time of the day. You know, there's nothing that compares with the light of the sun and how it bounces around the environment. You know, you're gonna get some blues coming in from the sky, some green bounces from the grass below, or concrete, or whatever have you, quite a bit of fill light. So if you are gonna be compositing with something that's naturally lit, I would recommend shooting your subject naturally lit as well. If it's something that like an indoor room and you wanna kind of like match that, then place a couple of lights in your scene to simulate the lighting that would be in, in the actual scene. In this studio, we've got a bunch of overhead lighting that's kind of like shining down and then it's bouncing off the ground and filling light up. So if I were to try to simulate that, I'd probably put a few lights above my subject and have them basically do the same thing. So yeah, background first and then the subject.
Perfect. So this next one is from Aeolistic Will on YouTube. He's asking, what's the best lighting type and technique for bringing out the dimensional shimmer of fine wood furniture?
Fine wood furniture. Good question. I have never photographed fine wood furniture, but I'm gonna wager a guess. What I would probably do is get my fill light up. So using V-flats or shooting a light into the ceiling, whatever have you, to get a decent bit of fill light to make basically your subject just about completely flat. And then at about maybe a half stop above, I would put like a small point light, either bare bulb or in a reflector. What that's going to do is it's going to catch some specular highlights on the wood, bring out some of the detail, and I would play around with having that light come from behind the camera or behind the subject, so almost like a rim light. I wouldn't put this like too high above, like you don't want it to like blow out any of the detail, but sometimes just a little bit of a hard shadow can really help to define the shape of an object, like a piece of furniture or something like that, as well as bring out some of the characteristics of the actual material as well. So start off with something flat and then put a hard light in there as well. And, that's a guess, but that's definitely how I would start to photograph fine wood objects.
All right.
What are you photographing fine wood objects? So I want to know what this fine wood object
Maybe
is.
he's a carpenter.
Maybe you're a carpenter.
And then he wants to be a photographer.
Ah.
And he wants the
faux carpenter. All right. Well, let us know in a comment. What are you photographing fine woods? And I want to know, did you take this picture? Did you use the lighting techniques we used? And post an image or something like that. I want to see it.
Next question is from Light Raining on YouTube.
Ooh, I like your name.
She's asking, what is the best startup or low budget solution for a vlog video?
Good question. When Phlearn was starting out, we used a lot of lights that you would get like at Home Depot. We kind of talked about this in a comment earlier, but using even just a normal, they have these like clamp fixtures that you can get for like $10 or $15, and then you can put like 100 watt or 200 watt daylight balance halogen bulbs. You want to keep your lighting relatively consistent. So if you have a daylight balance bulb, which if you guys are unfamiliar, it's going to be kind of that bluish color. You don't want that mixing a whole lot with like halogen lighting or like soft white, which is in light bulbs terms like almost like a yellow color. So if you are shooting indoors and most of the lighting is tungsten or halogen, make sure to match your white balance on your camera to that lighting, and vice versa. Like if you're shooting and all the light in the room is that like soft white color, I would recommend getting one of those clamps or fixtures and then using a soft white light bulb so the color temperature of the light you use for your subject matches the color temperature of the rest of the room, and then you can set your white balance to that color temperature and expose correctly. And what I did is I actually bought 3 of those clamps, those little like video, they're just like work lamps basically. I bought 3 of them and I duct taped them together.
Wow.
It made the light source slightly bigger and a little bit more powerful, and it cost $40, and it really did look pretty good. So yeah, that would be my suggestion. Just go with something cheap. And if you do go with like the halogen type, they don't get hot, which is also really nice. They take like 10 minutes to warm up to get to the full brightness, but they don't get hot. And that is really nice because a lot of the video lighting that I've seen gets really hot. So yeah.
Last question. This is from Fernando Custer on YouTube. He's asking, in your opinion, can you mention what are the differences between amateur lighting and professional lighting? Not talking about budget, but about techniques. Example, soft shadows, backlighting, catching lights in the eyes, etc.
Good question. And that's a tough question too, because I've seen a lot of professional photographers who really don't have that great lighting, but they rely on other things to make their images what they are. Example of Terry Richardson comes to mind. His lighting is just, it's classically what you would call bad lighting, pretty much. I mean, it's like an on-camera flash, but he uses other things to make his images interesting. So in that case, I would say nothing makes it special because it's just not special. In the case of someone like Jill Greenberg, she's using a ton of rim lights, a lot of light, coming from behind her subject, and that's what's kind of creating that look. Someone like Gregory Crutzen, his work is like very, very tight as far as lighting ratios goes, and he's using a lot of large LUTs with a lot of modifiers to really direct his light in towards the subject. Someone like David LaChapelle doesn't use very complex lighting. His lighting is usually a lot more broad, and he realizes what's going on with the subject as well. There are photographers like Platon, who's pretty much famous for a one light setup, and again, he relies on the interaction between the subject and the camera. And there are a lot of people who light very, very well, and I think when I see great lighting, I'm thinking of interesting color temperatures. Anthony Mandler is actually he lights incredibly, incredibly well. And I think what I love about his lighting is none of his images look lit. They all look like they were taken in natural light, even though they were not. Ryan Schuette's another one, he's so good. So interesting color temperatures going on. Throwing some gels in there, but not having those like overpower what's going on in the scene. So like a hint of red or a hint of orange or a hint of blue, I think can look really good. So having some interesting color temperatures going on is nice. Making sure to balance the proper exposure and the fill light. A lot of people, when they start off, they kind of forget about fill light. They'll get like, one light on their subject and it's like, it's exposed decently well, but then the rest of their subject is really underexposed, and you really want a decent bit of fill light for your subject. And I guess the last thing that I really notice about photographers who have this, good lighting is they take their time and they really do spend a long time on lighting. So if they're going to be working on set, most of the time they'll go to the set a couple times before the actual shoot happens, and they'll test out lighting. They'll have like a day of pre-lighting if they can do that, or they'll use a lighting method that they've kind of used many, many times before. So those lighting ratios are interesting. The difference between a stop on one light in a 8-light setup can make a difference between a decent photo and a great photo. And I've seen it before in my own work. So subtle sometimes where I can't even repeat it. It's just like, wow, this light is gorgeous, don't ever touch it. And then I'll try to do the exact same thing a few days later and it won't look as good. So sometimes it's really subtle, but I would really recommend just taking your time and don't settle. Just don't stop until you think it's really great lighting, and then you hit it. And once you hit it, just keep shooting.
Thank you again for submitting your questions to us.
Look forward to our next topic. We're going to be announcing it this coming Monday on YouTube, where you guys can submit your questions to our next topic and have a video where we answer your questions, just like this one. Thanks again, guys, and we'll Phlearn you later. Bye.
Later.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.